is a quick demonstration of some clay procedures for this project. Make sure that you take masking tape and put your first and last name, your class number, which can be found by your phone parking spot, in the period, your class period number. Please also put that on a piece of tape on the middle of your bag. If you put it on the end of your bag, you're not going to be able to see it. So we want it right on the middle of your bag. Whenever you are not working with your clay or you're preparing to put your clay away for the day, it is important that you grab a moist paper towel and you put it around your clay. So here's how to do that. You're going to, with the water that's at your table, grab a dry paper towel, dunk it in the water, and squeeze out all the excess water. Carefully unfold it and wrap it around either your clay ball or your clay slab, depending where you are on the project. Then carefully put your piece on your 6" by 6" wooden board, and then get your bag, and you're gonna put this whole thing very carefully all the way at the bottom, and then you wanna let all the air out. So I'm just gonna smush all the air out, and I'm going to twist it around so it's like a nice skinny long twist, and I'm going to roll this twist underneath. Then I'm gonna very carefully bring this to the shelf where my spot is for my particular class and leave it. So that happens every single day when you guys are done working with clay until you are finished with the project. Before we can move on to step 2, which is creating our slab, we've got to finish up step 1. After you take a picture of your ceramic plate design, make sure that you submit it in that CAMI document. It's time to cut out this design. We don't want to cut out any of the inside information. We just want to cut out the outside information. Go ahead and throw your trash away, and you're ready to create your slab. So when you get your clay, it's going to be in a square-ish formation like this. So we've got to make it go into a sphere. So the way that you do that is by kind of using your hand in a cup formation, as if you were drinking water with your hands. You kind of want to pack your clay into a ball. So it takes a little bit of pressure. And you got to keep turning your ball of clay. So when your clay looks like a ball, go ahead and just with your hands, smash it down into what I like to call a hamburger patty. And I like to flip it over on both sides. That way I've smashed it on both sides, and it's time to start using your rolling pin to make your slab increase. We need it to be the size of our 6" by 6" piece of wood. You're gonna have these guides here. We don't quite need them yet, but go ahead and prep your station to have them. This is gonna end up being the thickness of your slab. So you're just gonna start in the middle with your rolling pin, and you're just gonna rock it back and forth a little bit. And then before it gets too long this way, you're going to turn it so that you can continue to evenly distribute your clay. So now my clay is getting a lot thinner. It's not as thin as the sticks yet. So you're gonna notice that my rolling pin is gonna start riding on the sticks. That's a good thing. Just remember to keep flipping. You're sort of turning into a pancake back and forth to make sure that you have a nice, even distribution. If that happens, like I just got my finger in it, just kind of roll it out. Now, before we turn this beautiful circle slab into your design, you're gonna go ahead and write your initials and what period you're in with the end of a paper clip. If you don't know how to make this paper clip into like a clay writing utensil, you just take this end right here and you make it straight, and now you can write with it like you do a pencil. Don't go all the way through your clay, just enough so that it leaves this indentation here. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your beautifully designed ceramic plate, multifunctional plate, and you're gonna actually flip it over because this is the back, so we wanna make sure that we are actually carving the back and we're not flip-flopping our design. So I'm just centering it in my clay slab, kind of rubbing it down a little bit, and I'm not gonna cut right around this. What I'm actually gonna do is very, very gently just trace around it, just kind of barely scratching the clay. You'll notice my other hand is holding down the paper since I'm using it like a template. So the best thing is if you make a mistake in clay, it's very forgiving. You can just take your finger, you don't have to wet your finger or anything, just take your finger and kind of smooth over very gently and then redraw what you need to do. Now, you're going to cut out your design. So holding your paper clip as straight up and down as you can, you're gonna cut out your design. If you have it at an angle, then your edges are gonna be angled. So as straight as possible. And cutting all the way through the clay. And is to make sure that you are entering and exiting the clay as often as you need to, because it just is easier to cut out that way. So I'm gonna go around my cherry, and then I'm just gonna go right out. And I have that little piece of clay. Go ahead and keep this in like a small ball to the side. We'll have an area for scrap clay. So enter, exit. That makes me have a much cleaner cut because I'm not trying to drag clay around. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut out this whole design. So go ahead and put this extra clay so it doesn't dry out in the area. We have some scrap clay bags. So next you're going to, before we flip over our slab, we're going to take just a tiny bit of water and we're going to use that finger and see all these crummy edges that I have. If you let those crummy edges stay, they'll stay through the kiln and become really super sharp. So the biggest thing probably with this project is you need to think of is smoothing everything out so there's no little crumbs and no little sharp areas. So I'm just very gently, this is not at all a rough movement. Also, don't hold your slab in your hand like this. I'm doing this just for this demonstration. Never hold your slab because you can see that it's getting bent. I'm doing this just to show you guys close up. Just take your finger, smooth out any of those rough bumps. And you'll see that it kind of becomes almost like icing. Essentially what you're making is slip. And I'm just gonna make sure that my whole edge, I'm not gonna worry about well, it's actually the front edge. I'm just gonna worry about this, the outer edge, and especially the back of the plate, because you're not gonna touch the back of the plate anymore for this project. So I'm just gonna go around and smooth all of my edges very carefully. All right, go ahead and when you're happy with your smoothing, you like the way the back edge and the outer edge looks, flip your slab over, and this is gonna be the front of your slab now. What we have to do now is, since we have our nice design, we have to get these little wells on here somehow. So this isn't like magic like we can do with the linoleum project where we just put it on and the graphite magically transferred. We gotta do a little work for it. So you're gonna carefully put your design on your clay. And if it's not exactly perfectly lined up, that's okay. Just try and get it as close as possible. And you're gonna wanna use not your paper clip tool, because the paper clip is so sharp, it's gonna go through your paper. We wanna use a wooden tool that has a sharp point. If anything that looks like these two are really good to use, and you're gonna use it as if it were a pencil. So you're going to make an imprint or an indentation. So all I'm gonna do is I'm going to go around with a little bit of pressure. I'm gonna go around my shapes, just around the outer edge, and you'll notice that the paper gets indented into the clay. That's a good thing. I'm gonna do that to all my shapes now. So when I'm done, I'm just gonna carefully peel off my paper, and I have the beautiful, very light indentations on my shape. I'm going to go ahead and take my paperclip tool, and I'm not going to dig, but I'm going to more firmly trace where these spots are, just to make sure that I can see them really clearly. It also helps give a boundary for the next step with the carving. Now it is time to carve out these recessed areas with your wonderful loop tools. These tools are really fun because they quickly remove clay, but just like we did carving with linoleum, go slow. It's important to make sure that when you're carving, that you're carving where the tool is. You could possibly go bigger than you want by turning or tilting your tool. Make sure you also choose the appropriate tool for what you're cutting. If you have something that's really detailed and has like a very angular shape, you're going to want to use an angular loop. If you have something very round like me, I would use a round loop, but this is obviously way too big. So you need to make sure that you choose the appropriate tool for your sections. Now, I could use this tool on this, but I'm going to need to go with something that is slightly smaller, like this oval tool for these ones right here. So when you're working, basically what you should do is smooth as you go. So when you are carving out your shapes, once it is carved out, you should go ahead and smooth that spot. There's multiple ways that you can smooth. You can smooth with your finger. That is my personal preferred way. You can smooth with a variety of wooden tools. There's some wooden tools that have like little knobs on the end. This kind of mimics the shape of your finger, so these are great. If you have an angular thing, you might have to smooth with something that, of course, has an angle, kind of has a sharper edge. That you guys need to have patience and kind of get used to working with the clay. The clay does not have a mind of its own. You're in control of it, so make sure that you are treating the clay nicely. Another thing you can smooth with is a paintbrush. I do not recommend smoothing with the sponges. The sponges can't really fit in these small areas. So that's not really a great thing, but the sponge is a great thing to have to the side to like kind of wet your finger or wet your tool as you are doing the smoothing, even wet your paintbrush, because you don't want to overwater your clay. So let's go ahead and get started with carving. I like to make sure that my clay tool is clean and free of any dried clay from somebody else. And you're just going to kind of dig your tool in, not too deep, and pull towards you. So you can always turn your clay so it's like you're turning towards you a little bit more. You don't want to go super deep when you're doing this carving. You can kind of keep a pile of little clay pieces. I always recommend kind of looking at your piece from the side to see how deep you are at the current moment. If you go too deep, you're going to hit the bottom of your clay and your piece is going to obviously be really weak. So I'm just going to keep going until I think it has enough of a shadow. That seems pretty good to me. It has a nice little lip on it. It maybe is about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Kind of just is nice and it looks really good, I think. So now it's going to be time for the smoothing. This is a big enough area that I can just smooth with my finger. So I'm just going to get my finger damp and I'm just going to kind of push the clay around very gently. Smoothing is all about being very gentle with your piece. I don't want to have any sharp edges and I don't want to have any crumbs. Now, if you have an area that you can't do this with your finger, like I said, use the bottom of a wooden tool and just very gently use slow motions to kind of carve out your spots. If you have really tiny areas, a brush might be helpful because it kind of drags the clay. You will have a little bit of brush indentations, but at least it got the like little clay crummies gone. So for every single thing that you're cutting out, this is the process you use. You carve until it's about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch deep. You really just kind of got to go by feel. If you'd like to feel the examples that Mrs. Cantrell and I have, that'd probably be a good idea. So you can know how deep to go. And then you've got to smooth out your recessed area that you just carved. carved through my slab. Here's the thing. You can fix this because clay is forgivable, like we said. Do not pick up your piece. I repeat, do not pick up your piece. You're going to use your extra scraps as a little band-aid. So you're just going to add a little bit of water, kind of smooth out what you have here already. And you're going to use what we call the smoosh method. You want to make sure that when you do the smushing that there's no air bubbles here. So we just have to very carefully kind of push down to make sure there's a strong suctioned gap. So this is going to take some time. Don't put too much pressure that you start to smush the rest of your clay. We're just focusing on this area where I made a mistake. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my dry finger and I'm just kind of pulling the clay in different directions to fill this little well back up. I went way too deep and I need to make sure that I fix it, but I don't want it to look like crap. So I'm just going very carefully with my fingers and smoothing it out. This is also helping me to make it a little bit more level since I had that hole right in the middle. Now, once you've smoothed it and it looks like it's more like a consistent piece of clay, you can go back if you need to like carve. Like I'm a little bit high on this side down here, but I want to make sure this is kind of fragile right now since I just made that mistake. So I want to make sure that I don't carve too much because I need to be really gentle with this space. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my smoothing of this particular well. We have to do some finishing touches before we're ready for the kiln. So if you can see, I have a lot of areas that aren't smooth on my edges. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure everything is smooth. Remember, any little crumbs will dry very, very, very hard and be very, very sharp. So you want to take this time to smooth. If on some bigger areas you do want to use the sponge, you can. I still personally prefer my fingers, but the sponge can help to make some level areas. I'm going to really hard to get this super duper smooth. Notice that my sponge has no water in it. It really is just a damp sponge. You never want to apply a soaking wet sponge to a piece of clay. So once you're happy with how smooth your piece is, it is ready for the kiln. But before it goes to the kiln, it needs about a week to dry to get all of that moisture out so it's bone dry and ready for the kiln. So very carefully pick up your slab and put it on your piece of wood and deliver this to your teacher. They're gonna put it in a spot where it's not gonna be around anybody else's work and it can alone dry out for a week. Before you do that, make sure you do take a picture of what your slab looks like before giving it to your teacher, because that's one of the things that you need to turn in on the CAMI assignment for a grade. We need to see what it looks like before it goes into the kiln. Please make sure when you clean up any of your tools so that your table looks nice. You don't want to leave a mess for the next people. All of these little crumbs should go in the scrap bags that we have. Please do not take them out of this room. If you do, you will be banned from clay. Make sure that everything looks nice. You guys can go ahead and throw these away. Any paper towels that you had, you can throw away as well. You don't need them anymore. All right, it is time to glaze. When you guys are glazing, make sure that you have some sort of a mat underneath your work because it is very, very messy. It can be messy. You guys are going to have a brush and you're going to have one color of glaze for this project. When you are choosing your glaze, don't be distracted by what it looks like. So this looks like a beautiful like blue-green robin's egg color. Boom, it's not, it's this color. So you need to make sure to pay attention to what's actually on the label or even the chart that Mrs. Cantrell and I set out. Now with glaze, you have to make sure that you do 3 coats. So I always like to have a writing utensil next to me, and every time I do 1 coat, I like to write it down. Another thing that you guys have to be conscious of is when you are glazing, you cannot get anything on the back. Glaze is basically glass. It melts down and becomes glass and forms to your plate, but something else it can form to is the kiln shelf. So if you have any glaze that's on the back, it will get stuck like this, and Mrs. Cantrell and I have to use extreme measures to get it off. It could also ruin our kiln shelves, which is not great. So please make sure, try as hard as you can not to get glaze on the back. Now, what I would do, because we have so many recessed areas in this project, is I would start there. You want to make sure that your coats are consistent. You don't want to make them gloppy or runny or super thick. You also don't want them super thin. So it's kind of like Goldilocks here, not too thin, not too thick. So I just want to get enough glaze to cover my brush. I don't want glaze going all the way up to here. If you have glaze that is lower and you have to dig your brush down, tilt it and look down. Don't just dip your brush in and get glaze all over the handle. That does nobody any good. So you're going to notice that your first coat is very see-through. That's okay. I'm making sure that I'm getting all of my edges. It also might feel like a little bit scratchy. That's because well, your clay is hard now, so that's why it's scratchy. So I'm going all in my recessed areas first, kind of doing the lip of those recessed areas as well. Now I'm going to do the flat surfaces, and I'm just going to kind of use a back and forth motion with my brush, and I'm okay with it being a little bit thinner. I'm not glopping it on like that so it creates a puddle. I'm kind of pushing that glaze around so it has a good first coat. If you notice any like glops, just clean them up before they dry. Then I'm going to carefully hold my plate and try and get my glaze just on the edge. I'm going to try not to get it on the sides. Now your fingers might get a little bit of glaze on them. This comes off your hands, no problem. And now that I'm all the way around, I'm just going to make sure that I got everything. I'm going to put my brush down. I'm going to close with the screw cap my glaze, and I'm going to write first coat done. And I'm going to wait for this to dry, which should only take a couple minutes. It's time for my second coat. You'll know that your first coat is dry when you kind of feel this chalky finish. So just like the first coat, I'm going to start in all the recessed areas, work on the flat areas, and then do my sides. Wait for that chalky finish before coat number 3. Time for the last layer, the third layer. Now with the third layer, you can go a little bit thicker, but still not gloopy and gloppy and a puddle of glaze. That's not going to end very well for you. When you're all the way done, make sure that you thoroughly screwed this glaze cap back on the glaze, and make sure you clean your brush. It just rinses out with water. When this is dry, you'll move on to cleaning the back off with a damp sponge. Once your last layer of glaze has dried, it's going to be important to check the back of your piece. So if you notice, I went over the edges here. That's not good. That's going to stick to the kiln shelf. So what we want to do is using our sponge in a very level way. We don't want to wrap our sponge around. We just kind of want to go from the center out. And what that's gonna do is gonna make sure that I don't lose any of my glaze on the edge. If you wrap your glaze or your sponge around like this, you're gonna lose some of your glaze. So you just kind of go from the middle out. Takes a little bit of patience and not a soaking wet sponge. Now, this one that's a little bit over, I can just be very, very careful and take my sponge to get it because it was a little bit of a bigger glob. But these minor globs that are here, again, watch how it just goes away just by going from the middle out on my back of my piece. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure all the glaze is removed from all my edges. So once my piece looks nice and clean, I am ready to, you can give this to Mrs. Cantrelleri and we will fire it and it'll become a beautiful piece of glassy, shiny looking glaze. Great work, guys.